Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dhruv. Let me start with the way the book flows, with the introduction as such. And I think you can also address the sir's question. So you make a quote in the book in the introduction part which says, capturing a particularly Indian perspective on international affairs is intrinsically difficult. Why is that so? Does it have a historical perspective? Because unlike, say, the Greco-Roman world or the other European parts or China or Japan, geographically, civilizationally, though we were united, administratively there were different kingdoms. Like you said, the southern kingdoms went to southeast, the northwestern empires had relationship with Persian kingdoms and the Greco-Roman world, and as such. So is that the history that stops us from having a common Indian perspective, or even the diversity that is there today? Does that play a role? So that's my first question.
Okay, thank you. I'll get that actually partly addresses the first question you asked as well. Why write this book? I was living in Delhi from 2016 to 2019, and I actually traveled all over the country. And I found people, pretty young people, were very interested in learning more about India's international relations. I was talking to engineering students, law students, others. But they would often ask me, what should I read to learn more? And I could say, here are 5 good books on India-China relations, read this book on India-Pakistan, read this book on India's nuclear program, things like that. But they all told parts of a story, and some of them often presumed that the reader would be more familiar with the subject or something like that. So I wrote this basically for that audience, people who want an introduction to India's international engagement, in the international relations. And that's why it has a sort of historical background, because I think we need that foundation. And 2, it has a strategic, what are the objectives today, and laying it out as clearly as possible. So that was the main purpose. I wrote a sort of first draft of it between 2017, 2018. It was not very good, to be honest. And then after the pandemic, I kind of rewrote it significantly, although some of the research was from the earlier period. So I really finished it about March, April, May of last year, and before the last Indian election. So that was really sort of why I did it. But capturing an Indian point of view is difficult because I'm one of 1.4 billion people. So my opinion matters as much as 1.4 billion other people, and it's very presumptuous of me to say this is an Indian perspective on everything. So I had to be very careful in saying I want to show it's the diversity issue. We have debates on you get 2 Indians in a room, we have 3 opinions about any issue. So we're all argumentative. And so I had to be careful about trying to show that diversity of views. Be careful. I've avoided talking about some things because they're very complicated and I didn't want to get into those debates. But I've tried to provide, to the extent possible, a singular narrative that is as objective as possible, that does not exaggerate the role of one person or the other. So, I've been getting a lot of questions on non-alignment and how I describe it. This is what Nehru said. This are people who criticized Nehru at that time. This was the debate, how the concept evolved over time, even in Nehru's own thinking. So I've tried to make it as objective, and I hope, so far the response I've gotten is very positive. I have Shashi Tharoor gave a very glowing endorsement of it. I saw him 2 days back, and he was very, the organizer and the Hindu have both written positive reviews. So I feel I've got the whole spectrum behind me. So I've tried to keep it objective, but that was the challenge.
Okay. Moving on to non-alignment, that was my second question, non-alignment. So did the non-alignment movement strategy actually help us? Because that was the de facto foreign policy strategy post-independence. If it did not help, would the results of the early wars in the 60s, would it have been different? Did non-alignment hamper our strategic moves during the wars? Because you also touch upon how actually non-alignment did not work, or we went beyond that in terms of, say, education. We had foreign countries helping us in setting up IITs and IIMs. In terms of health, how did WHO help us? So was it actually non-alignment, or did we have some other ways of getting through what we were actually?
No, so non-alignment has actually been subject to a lot of distortions, even by people who support it, right? They've made it something that it wasn't originally. That's why I've quoted Nehru in two very large segments there, because I wanted people to see what was he thinking about it. And basically, as I read it, non-alignment was meant originally to be very pragmatic. It was meant saying this is a complicated world where the superpowers are in competition. How can India derive the maximum benefit from this world? Right? That was the original idea. And I show how India did derive quite a big benefits for 15 years. However, in 1962, when we went to war with China, neither the US, because it's inhibited our own building of strength, it's impeded our own options. So let's not do this thing with the Americans. Why? Because it's against our non-aligned, whereas, not just France, Vietnam has defense relations with the US, has trade relations with China, has things with Russia, gets training from Russia. So
I guess to have our freedom of action.
if we can maximize freedom of action, good. That will also come at a cost. But the strategic autonomy, was relevant in the nuclear context particularly. That India felt it will never be dependent on another power to have a nuclear umbrella. But in today's context, I think we need to be more flexible and more open-minded. But that's my view.
The next question is on the important chapter of Atmanirbhar. Yeah. So you again, I quote you, an overview of India's own history reveals how periods of isolation led to its missing out on opportunities, resulting in a more hostile international environment. So why do you say that? And what do we do? Learn from history. What do we do? What do we don't do in terms of Atmanirbhar?
This might have to be I have to rush to the airport after this. This might be the last question. I'll tuck it into briefly address the Pakistan question. So Atmanirbhar Bharat is, a self-reliant India. Although I think you can interpret it a few different ways. And I think different people, including in the government, mean slightly different things by it also. What I try to do is warn against one interpretation of it, which is we should not be completely isolationist. Because when we are, it actually does a few things. It means we cannot actually shape our international environment until it's too late. And we have some episodes in our own history where that's happened. Two, we cannot actually maximize some of the benefits that engagement offers. We need market access abroad. We need to compete for market access abroad. We need investment from abroad. We need technology from abroad. Yes, we can develop it ourselves, but it will be more costly, it will take longer time. So there are these trade-offs. So you have to be smart and intelligent about it. So I think if you are focused on the longer-term objective of self-reliance, particularly in certain areas which are important for national security or economic security reasons, critical technologies, medical supplies we need for. So these areas are areas India should be more self-sufficient. We need actually sometimes to work instrumentally with partners to accelerate that process towards indigenization. I'll give you a very simple example, the Green Revolution. So the US was actually using food aid as a lever for India in the 1960s. If ships did not come from the US, people would starve. This was the situation. Now, strangely, some US entities, scientists, including some people in the government, helped bring about the Green Revolution here, introduced strains of wheat that were more drought resistant, stronger, had higher yields. So within a few years, India became self-sufficient in wheat production, which actually lessened our dependence on the US. So the Green Revolution is a good example of how working with foreign partners actually helped make us more self-reliant. But there are many other, I give examples of telecom, the Delhi Metro, the space program, where we've done that. In other areas, we have not.
Space is an excellent example.
Space is a very good example, yeah. But the other areas, we've not done that. We haven't done that in electronics manufacturing yet. We're working on that. Some of that's happening here. Semiconductors, we've not done that yet. We're starting that now. So this is what it's about. So I think it's dangerous to look at Atmanirbhar Bharat as complete isolationism. Because that's what I'm getting at.
That's the risk that we run into. Just one more question.
Last
we'll
question,
wrap up. Yeah. So just taking off from what we saw in the video, which was the end, it talks about ahimsa paramo dharma, which means non-violence is the best dharma. But that's always the half-quoted sloka. The full sloka says himsa tataiva cha, which means violence in the service of dharma is also dharma, which is why we have the forces, we have the police and others. So how good is India been? Because India is always known as the country of Buddha, Ashoka and Gandhi is what people see abroad. But in terms of how we come up as a hard power, how good are we in that? Because the world is going to be in terms of divided into multiple ways. It could be liberal democracies versus dictators, civilized national divisions, left versus right, which Meloni spoke about. So how good is India good in enforcing hard power? We are talking about soft power in terms of yoga and other things.
Look, I think actually we have a stronger tradition of hard power than we like to imagine. I document that, we fought 4 wars with Pakistan and China. We had the liberation of Goa, the territorial integrity, Jammu and Kashmir, Hyderabad. We've had used military force in the region, the Bangladesh Liberation War, IPKF in Sri Lanka. Farther afield, India sent missions to Korea during the Korean War, a small medical mission that General Tamizha led. We sent forces to the Congo. The first Paramveer Chakra overseas conflict was in the Congo. So we have this tradition of using hard power. We sometimes forget it ourselves. Huh?
Can you explain Ashoka?
Yeah. But again, I think there is a question of just war as well. So the Bangladesh Liberation War, I think many would say, particularly in hindsight, was a just war. There was a genocide happening there. And yes, it also advanced India's strategic objective. We cut, Pakistan into 2. But there was a justification for it as well. And you had to lay the ground for that justification. But I go back even to Ashoka. And Ashoka is not, sometimes people interpret him as a pacifist. It was not simply pacifism. It was, you can use force if it is just and moderate and used in certain ways, right? This idea, what is now called just war theory, which is, there's the Western canon of that. But I think we actually have a strong tradition of that in India. The Bhagavad Gita is is about just war theory in some ways.
It's call for duty.
It's a duty, yeah, the dhamma. So I think again we ignore our own traditions in hard power. This doesn't mean that India should be interventionist and reckless in its use. And again, we need to learn from others' mistakes. But there are going to be times for self-defense, but for other reasons where India will have to use military power. And we need to be prepared for that, the physical preparedness of that, having a standing military, having a military-industrial complex, having an operational readiness, but also I think having that debate, a healthy debate about when is it justified and wise to use military power.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I have to run. I've enjoyed this conversation very much. I'm very thankful to everybody who made this possible. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
To conclude this enlightening session, I invite Mr. Sundararaman Kakana to deliver the word of thanks.
Thank you so much. Quickly, we have 3 books for distribution among the public. You can do it. I request Hans sir to kindly the senior bureaucrat.
Thank you. Sir, please. Hello, sir. Thank you, sir.
Now just a minute. Now. I'm a great fan of your grandfather.
Thank you, sir.
Study. Great, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
No,
Yes,
no.
please. Thank you for your question. I would love to.
know you. Yes, I was absolutely delighted to.
You can get my contact information. I'm happy to keep up the
I'd
contact.
love to.
Yeah,
Love to talk to you about this. So much to ask and so much to talk to.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
You can have a little bit more about my organization. Huh?
Yes,
Yeah.
I've heard about
Yeah.
this.
Thank you. Thank you.